Hello and welcome to the channel. Zach D Productions here, and I'm here for my top 30 favorite bands list. And it's actually been a little while since I've last done one of these, and this is going to be a 2021 edition of my favorite bands list. And I feel like that this would be rather good for new subscribers as well, just to give you guys an idea of the music that I like. And I think that this is also good for those that are maybe looking to check out some of these bands as well. And hopefully this video will encourage you to check out some of the bands that I'm naming on this list. But yeah, before we do begin with the top 30, I do got a few honorable mentions here. And those honorable mentions are Pantera, Fear Factory, Anthrax, Death Angel, Sevendust, and Soen. All very good bands that are worth checking out. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the actual top 30. Now, this list, it's not in any particular order besides the fact that it's in alphabetical order. That's really the only thing about this list that's really in any order, is just by alphabet, not from my least favorite to favorite or anything like that. So just keep that in mind. So the first band up, Aerosmith, legendary rock band, of course. I'd say if you are a fan of rock music, you got to check these guys out if you're not familiar with them. Steven Tyler, obviously a very good front man, and can't go wrong with some of their biggest hit songs like Dream On, which everyone has heard at this point, Walk This Way, Sweet Emotion, and Back in the Saddle. A lot of really great songs in their discography and a lot of really great albums, such as Rocks, which is highly regarded as one of their best, Toys in the Attic, the debut album, Get Your Wings, and even some more from the 80s like Done with Mirrors and Permanent Vacation. A lot of really great albums from Aerosmith, and by far I've been really liking everything that I've been hearing from the band. Definitely a great band. So Aerosmith. Next band up, we got Alice in Chains, probably my favorite in the grunge genre. Rest in peace to Lane Staley, of course, and when it comes to the two Alice in Chains singers, I definitely prefer Lane Staley. And my two favorite albums from the band are Facelift and Dirt. Honestly, those two albums do fight for number one for me. Those two albums are must-listens, I'd say. So Alice in Chains is definitely a band I wanted to mention here. So next we got As I Lay Dying. I'd say they're an essential metalcore band, to be honest. Just given how impactful they are in the genre. And I would say that they are one of the best in the metalcore genre, especially with the amount of range that Tim Lambesis has in his growls, in his screaming vocals. He definitely has a lot of range, and I think in each album, he kind of improves on that. And yeah, many solid albums from the band. Now, the only album of theirs that I would say is not that good is probably their debut album, but everything else is really good, I'd say. But of course, you can't go wrong with albums like Frail Words Collapse, An Ocean Between Us, The Powerless Rise, and even their latest one, Shaped by Fire. But yeah, a very good band for sure. So As I Lay Dying. Next band up, Asia, a supergroup that was formed by members of progressive rock bands. And what you get with Asia is just good old 80s pop rock is basically what Asia's sound is. But you know what? They do it just so fine, I think. And if you're a fan of the 80s eras of Genesis and Yes, I think that Asia is a band that you might like, at least the 80s era. And I do think that when it comes to Asia, the first two albums are their best, the debut and Alpha. I mean, I think that those are their best albums. Now, when it comes to the John Payne era, I actually like the John Payne era, especially their album Aqua. That probably is my favorite with John Payne with Asia. But yeah, I do like most of Asia's material. Now, I will admit, when it comes to the late 90s, early 2000s era of Asia, that's where it's kind of meh. That's where it kind of gets a little iffy, I guess. But I'd say most of their work is pretty solid. So Asia is a band that I wanted to mention here. Next band is Black Sabbath. I mean, legendary band, of course, and an essential heavy metal band. If you call yourself a metalhead and not familiar with these guys yet, you definitely got to check them out for sure. And I think all eras of Black Sabbath definitely have something to offer, because I know that some people complain that Black Sabbath has a rather inconsistent discography due to the constant lineup changes, because they started out with Ozzy and then Dio, Ian Gillan, Tony Martin. But again, all eras of the band do have something to offer. And my favorite albums from the band would probably be the first 5 Sabbath albums: the debut, Paranoid, Master of Reality, Volume 4, and Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. All strong albums, but even the albums after that are pretty good. So Black Sabbath is definitely a band worth talking about here. Alright, so the next band up is Breaking Benjamin. This was basically the first band that I ever got into, so of course they had to make the list. Now, would they be on the list if it wasn't for the nostalgia that I had for the band? I don't know, but either way, pretty strong band, I think. And I think that they're one of the best bands that make this kind of music, this 2000s hard rock alternative metal. I think that they do a very good job at it. Now, even though Ben Burnley, their frontman, doesn't have the best range out there when it comes to rock and metal, I think he does a pretty good job. And I will say that he at least does have a very recognizable voice. I mean, when you hear Ben's voice, you know immediately that it's Breaking Benjamin. So yeah, I mean, my favorite albums from the band have always been Phobia and Dear Agony. I mean, those albums are must-listens if you like 2000s hard rock or just this type of music in general. But all in all, Breaking Benjamin is a very solid band for sure that I had to mention on this list. Okay, so next, we got the band Death. They are one of the very few bands in the death metal genre that I actually like. To be honest, there's only really a couple bands in the genre that I can get into, and this one probably being my favorite. Chuck is a very good vocalist, I think. Very talented guy in everything that he does. And with Death, they started out more, raw, very gritty sounding in the 80s, and then, later on in their career, they started becoming a little more proggy with albums like Symbolic and The Sound of Perseverance. Now, when it comes to my favorite album from the band, that's always been tough for me. That sometimes does change because Death has no weak album, I think. But my favorite has always been Individual Thought Patterns, and that still might be my favorite, to be honest. But either way, all their stuff is solid, and you can't go wrong with the band, so Death is a band that I wanted to mention here. So next band up, Def Leppard. Definitely a very legendary band from the 80s, and, I've heard debates on whether or not this band is rock or metal, but I've always leaned more towards rock with this band. But either way, very solid band for sure. My favorites from the band have always been the first 4 albums: On Through the Night, High and Dry, Pyromania, and Hysteria. Now, when it comes to my absolute favorite, I would go with Pyromania. I think Pyromania just does everything right with the band. You got the more commercial side of the band, and you also got the heavier side of the band. And yeah. And Hysteria is probably their most mainstream, most commercial sounding album, which is not a bad thing, because, almost all Def Leppard fans would say that that's one of their best, and myself included. I think it is one of their best. But Def Leppard is a very good band. Okay, so next band up is Deftones, one of my favorites in the nu metal genre. Now, I know there's debates on there about whether or not they're nu metal or not, but at least their earlier days were nu metal, you could say. But when it comes to Deftones, I think all their albums are good. Now, obviously, there's some albums better than others in their discography, but when it comes to their weakest, I would probably have to go with their album Gore and the self-titled album, but even those ones are very strong, I think. And when it comes to my favorites from the band, I would go with Around the Fur, White Pony, and I might even go with their latest album, Ohms, is one of my favorites as well. I really enjoy that album, to be honest. Definitely a very strong album. And yeah, they definitely have an interesting sound to them, and definitely a band worth checking out if you like alternative metal or new metal. So Deftones, very solid band. So the next band up is Demon Hunter, one of the first metal bands that I ever got into. I've heard debates on whether or not this band is metalcore or not. I've always kind of placed them in the metalcore genre, and I think most people do anyways. But yeah, definitely one of the more unique bands in metalcore, I think. Ryan Clark, very good vocalist, and kind of an underrated vocalist as well. I think his range kind of goes underappreciated, I think. Now, when it comes to Demon Hunter, I think most of their stuff is good. There's really only a couple albums of theirs that I would really consider remotely weak, and those ones being Outlive and Peace, but even those albums do have a few songs that I do like from them. But when it comes to my favorites from the band, I mean, the Triptych has got to be one of my favorites, if not my favorite. True Defiance, one of their best for sure. And Extremist is another one of my favorites. Demon Hunter is a band that I did want to mention for this list. Next band up is Dream Theater. Probably my favorite progressive metal band. James Labrie, he has a very good voice, I think. I know he's one of the reasons why some people don't like Dream Theater, and you could say that he's an underappreciated vocalist as well, but I'm not sure. But either way, Dream Theater is a really great band, I think. There's really only one or two albums from this band that I would consider remotely weak once again. The Astonishing is probably my least favorite from the band, to be honest. I'm not sure what my second least favorite would be these days, but when it comes to my favorite albums from Dream Theater, Images and Words has got to be one of my favorites, if not my favorites. Awake is another one of my favorites. Metropolis Part 2. And 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence is also solid. I know some people don't like their album Falling Into Infinity, but I actually like that album. So yeah, there is some very strong albums from Dream Theater, so this is a band worth mentioning for the list. Okay, so the next band up is Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Really solid band in prog rock, of course, and everything that I've heard from the band is really good, I think. Now, I know some people kind of trash on their album Love Beach, but, you know, from what I've heard from that album, I actually didn't mind it. Maybe I'll have to give it another listen to, I guess, kind of see what fans are talking about, but it's not their best by any means. It's definitely not one of their best, but I don't think it's as bad as people say, at least from what I remember from the album, because I think the last time I checked it out is when I got into the band, so yeah. But when it comes to my favorites from the band, I mean, Brain Salad Surgery is a classic. I mean, definitely an album worth checking out if you like prog rock. Trilogy is also very solid. Tarkus, also very good. But yeah, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, legendary band, and definitely a band worth mentioning for this list. Alright, so next we got Fate's Warning, legendary prog metal band. And this is a band that did have two singers, and I would say that Ray Alder is the best one, and I know many people can agree with that. Now, I'm sure there's some, you know, hardcore elitists out there of the band that might say that the 80s era, the era with the previous vocalist is much better. Now, I do think that that is a good era, but I think Ray Alder just delivers something more to this band. Fate's Warning, you could say that they've never had a bad album, but I don't know. They do have some albums that do lack replay value, especially in the 2000s decade. But all in all, very good band. Some of my favorite albums from the band would be No Exits, which is the album that actually got me into the band, Perfect Symmetry, Parallels, and A Pleasant Shade of Grey. Just all really good albums, all worth checking out for sure if you like prog metal. So, Fate's Warning, very good band. Next, we got Genesis. Definitely a band that comes to mind when I think of essential progressive rock bands. I mean, if you like prog rock, you gotta check out these guys for sure. And when it comes to both the eras of Genesis, the Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins era, I think both eras are great. Now, I do prefer the Peter Gabriel era, but Phil Collins era is definitely not bad. But I do know that there's some people that complain about Phil Collins era because, oh, that's when they went poppy, that's when they went mainstream and poppy, but is that really a bad thing, though? Now, I would admit that the proggy stuff from the 70s is much better. Of course, the stuff with Peter Gabriel. But when it comes to my favorite albums from the band, I mean, it's got to be from the 70s, of course, like Foxtrot, Selling England by the Pound. And you know what? The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, their concept album, has actually grown on me a lot. I think that's a very strong album, actually. I don't know if I would say it's one of their best, but I do think it is a very good album, though. But yeah, Genesis, just absolutely great band. So the next band up, we got In Flames. Probably my favorite in the melodic death metal genre. Probably one of the few bands that I listen to in the genre as well. Now, I know that they don't make melodeath anymore. They're more alternative metal these days, unfortunately. But yeah, their later stuff is not as original as their previous work was, but I had to throw In Flames on the list because when it comes to their 90s material, just absolutely solid. Especially their album The Jester Race, which is probably my favorite from the band. Colony, Clayman, those are good albums. And you know, even some of the more alternative metal stuff is pretty good as well, like A Sense of Purpose and Sounds of a Playground Fading. I think those albums are pretty good as well. But yeah, In Flames, they're kind of a hit or miss band, I guess, for a lot of people. But you know what? When it comes to the classic era of In Flames, you can't go wrong with it, for sure. But I will say that some of their more recent material has been some of the worst metal that I've heard, probably ever, especially from what I heard from Siren Charms and some of the stuff that came after that, of course. But yeah, In Flames, I would say for the most part they're a good band, but they did go downhill, though. Okay, so the next band up is Iron Maiden. You know, if I had to narrow this list down to a top 10, this band would probably be in the top 10, to be honest. Iron Maiden is just an absolutely terrific band, and another band that I would say is essential for metalheads. I like most of their work, even though there's a couple albums of theirs that I'm kind of like meh on. There's only really 2 Iron Maiden albums that I think lack replay value, and those being Virtual 11 and The Final Frontier. But even those albums do have some very good songs, I think. But yeah, Iron Maiden, you can't go wrong with them. And I think their latest album, Senjutsu, is one of the best, if not even the best album of 2021, to be honest. But only time will tell on that, of course. But yeah, of course you can't go wrong with their classic era, with albums like Power Slave, Somewhere in Time, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, Number of the Beast, Peace of Mind. I mean, all really strong albums for sure, and classics. So Iron Maiden, just, I would say they're the prime definition of a heavy metal band. So yeah, definitely a great band. Same with the next band on this list, Judas Priest. I know there's debates on which band is better, Iron Maiden or Judas Priest, but I think they're both really great bands for sure. I've always been more of an Iron Maiden guy, but I really do like Judas Priest a lot, though. Definitely a very good band. Rob Halford, very good vocalist and frontman. He's got some fascinating range to his voice for sure, and the rest of the band does a very good job at everything they do as well. I do like most of Judas Priest's material, even though there's some albums that I'm kind of like meh on, but of course you can't go wrong with a lot of their classics like Stained Glass, Screaming for Vengeance, British Steel, and Painkiller. I mean, all very strong albums for sure. And there's of course other great albums from the band as well, like Sin After Sin and Sad Wings of Destiny, but I can go on and on about the career of Judas Priest, but yeah, definitely a very great band for sure. So Judas Priest, Definitely a great band, and another band that you should check out if you claim to love metal. So the next band up is from another progressive rock band, a pretty legendary band, I must say, King Crimson. This band has never released a bad album, even though some albums are better than others, of course. And I would say if you like prog rock, check these guys out. I mean, especially their classics, like their debut in The Court of the Crimson King, which is probably my favorite from the band. In the Wake of Poseidon, Larks. You also got Discipline. I mean, so many really great albums from King Crimson that are worth checking out for sure. I mean, if you like more complex sounding rock music that is more on the psychedelic side as well, definitely check out King Crimson. So the next band I want to talk about here is Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin was technically the first classic rock band that I got into in full. Not that I was not ever exposed to classic rock, but this was really the band that I really wanted to check out first when it comes to the world of classic rock, I guess. And definitely a great band. Robert Plant, arguably one of the best frontmen and in hard rock in general. But yeah, of course, Led Zeppelin's another band that has never released a bad album. I think all their stuff is great. Of course, you can't go wrong with their classics like the debut, Led Zeppelin 2, and of course, Physical Graffiti, and Presence, I think, is kind of an underrated album from the band. And of course, you can't go wrong with their fourth album too, which is their most successful one. But yeah, so many classics in Led Zeppelin's discography. I mean, no matter which album you listen to from Led Zeppelin, you know it's going to be a good one. So Led Zeppelin is a great band. Next, we got Linkin Park, probably my favorite new metal band, to be honest. Rest in peace to Chester Bennington. When it comes to this band's career, I definitely prefer their first few albums than their later day stuff, and I think most of the consensus can agree on that, but of course when it comes to those first three albums, you can't go wrong with them. Hybrid Theory, Meteora, and Minutes to Midnight. All very strong albums for sure. Linkin Park, they do a very good job at everything they do as well, and definitely a very great band. Next, we got Megadeth. Dave Mustaine, very talented guy, of course. Arguably one of the best guitar players of all time. And I know some people will say that he doesn't really have the best singing voice, but it's passable, I think. It's passable. I guess you could say the music that Megadeth makes is kind of an acquired taste, which is understandable, but you know what? Really great band, and one of the best in thrash, I'd say. And of course, you can't go wrong with their classic albums like Peace Sells But Who's Buying, So Far So Good So What, Rust in Peace, Countdown to Extinction, especially those albums. Definitely very strong albums from the band. So Megadeth is a band that was worthy of being on the list. Next, we got Metallica. Of course, why have Megadeth on the list if you can't have Metallica here as well? Yeah, Metallica, dare I say, is maybe my favorite thrash metal band. I know some people might say, "What? That's such a mainstream choice or whatever," but I don't really care about that. Metallica is just a really great band and definitely an essential metal band as well. I mean, definitely one of the first bands that come to mind when I think of essential metal bands. James Hetfield, really talented frontman, of course, legendary frontman, obviously. And yeah, the consensus would say that the first 5 albums from Metallica are where it's at, and I would probably agree. I mean, especially with albums like Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Justice for All, and the Black Album, which those are some of their best, I'd say. So yeah, definitely a classic band, and a lot of really strong albums in their career, even though you could tell that in the late 90s, early 2000s, they've kind of become a little meh, but I wouldn't say bad, though. So Metallica, great band overall. Next up, we got Overkill. Very consistent band in the thrash metal scene, I'd say. I think that's definitely a compliment that a lot of people can give the band Overkill, is that they are a pretty consistent band, even though they do try out different things here and there. Like I know in some points they've experimented with some groove metal, And I think it does work for them. I mean, it's like no matter what this band does, it just works for them, I think. But yeah, definitely a great thrash band with many great albums like Years of Decay, Under the Influence, and even the latest one I think is really good. The Wings of War, very strong stuff from the band. So Overkill, definitely a band that is worthy of being on the list as well. Next we got Queensryche. Really good band, really good metal band from the 80s, and when it comes to which era I prefer, I definitely prefer the Jeff Tate stuff, when it comes to the 80s and 90s at least, because Jeff Tate's voice, you could tell, was, I guess, not very strong in the 2000s and onward to present day, but all in all, I do prefer the Jeff Tate era of the band. I mean, especially since, in the classic era of Queensryche, you had albums like The Warning, Rage for Order, Operation Mindcrime, which is a fantastic album, probably one of the best concept metal albums of all time. Empire's also good, and same with Promised Land, which I think is one of their most underrated albums. But yeah, Queensryche, they have some good albums, but they also have some albums that are kind of hit or miss, just kind of meh. But all in all, very good band. So next we got Red. Now Red is another one of those bands that are like Breaking Benjamin, that make this kind of music, this alternative metal hard rock sound. I think they're another one of those bands that do it very well, if not the best way. But what I find interesting about Red is they know how to incorporate this heavy sound in with more orchestral elements, and it works very well with the band, especially behind Michael Barnes' vocals. I mean, Michael Barnes definitely has some range to his voice as well. But yeah, very strong band for sure. I've actually seen this band live twice, and yeah, definitely check out Red if you haven't checked these guys out already. And I'd say some of my favorite albums from the band would be End of Silence, Innocence and Instinct, and Of Beauty and Rage. Those would be my top 3 easily. But Red, definitely a really great band. Next we got Rush. Definitely one of my favorite bands of all time. I think if you had to narrow this list down to a top 5, I would say that Rush would be on that list, I'd say. Really great band, and Geddy Lee is a legendary frontman, of course. And rest in peace to Neil Peart, really great drummer, one of the best drummers of all time. Alex Lifeson is also a really good guitar player. I mean, this trio is probably one of the best trios of all time. I mean, the whole band does a fantastic job. All talented guys, of course, and Rush has no bad album in their discography. Some of my favorite albums from the band would be Moving Pictures, which is, of course, a lot of people's favorites, Signals, Permanent Waves, 2112, A Farewell to Kings, Hemispheres. But yeah, a lot of really strong albums from Rush, and if you like prog rock, check out these guys for sure. So Rush, definitely an incredible band, and they're a band that easily had to make the list. So next we got the band Tool. Not a band that has many albums, but you know what? They have a very strong career, I think. I know that this band is, they kind of like to take their good old time when releasing new albums and whatnot. Either way, Tool is a very good band, I think. Another kind of complex and psychedelic band, and all their stuff is good. All right, all their stuff is good. They're another band that has no bad album, but of course, when it comes to my favorites, Lateralis and Anima, they have to be my favorites, and I know a lot of people would agree with that. So Tool, really good band. Okay, so next we got the band Trivium, another band that's kind of debatable on whether or not this band is metalcore or not, but I can kind of see both arguments. But I would say for the most part they are metalcore, especially those first 2 albums from Trivium. But yeah, I know after those first 2 albums they kind of headed in a more thrashy direction, which I actually really like, and Shogun is probably my favorite Trivium album, to be honest. But they have other very strong albums, of course, like Ascendancy, The Crusade, and The Sin and the Sentence. But yeah, a lot of really strong albums from Trivium. Really great band, and I think that they're one of the best, more modern metal bands. Okay, so next we got Van Halen, arguably one of the best bands of all time. I know some people say that, and I could definitely see why. Rest in peace to Eddie Van Halen, probably another one of the best guitar players of all time. And to be honest, there's only really one Van Halen album that I would consider weak, and that was Van Halen 3. And that, of course, had a different vocalist and everything. It wasn't David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar, but, you know, when it comes to my favorite Van Halen albums, I mean, of course, the debut, Van Halen 2, Fair Warning, and some of the Sammy Hagar stuff, 5150, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, are very good albums. But yeah, I mean, if you like guitar playing, definitely check out Van Halen. Definitely a band worth checking out if you like guitar. So Van Halen is definitely a really great band. So the last band on this list is Yes, another legendary progressive rock band. And one of the first few bands that come to mind when I think of essential progressive rock bands that you should check out, especially if you want to get into the genre. But yeah, now with Yes, they have a couple albums that are kind of hit or miss, some albums that are kind of meh, but I think most of their stuff is very strong, especially from the 70s. I mean, especially since you got albums like the Yes album, which is, of course, one of their best, Fragile, Close to the Edge, Relayer, Going for the One, Tales from Topographic Oceans. What else you got? Drama and 90125 from the 80s time. Now, in the 80s, they did become a little more mainstream, but definitely not a bad thing. But I would say that their 70s progressive rock stuff is definitely their best. But all in all, Yes is definitely a really great band. So there you have it. That is my list of my top 30 favorite bands, 2021 edition. So let me know what you guys think. What are your favorite bands? You could name a top 30. If that's too much, you can name a top 20 or top 15 if you want. But either way, let me know what you guys think of my list. So with that being said, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day and take care.